Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Greenbook Podcast. I'm hosting. It's Karen Lynch. It's a pleasure to be joining you all today, wherever you are joining us from. And it's also a pleasure to be talking to today's guest. So let me tell you, I first met Matt O'Mara years ago when I reached out to him at Cranbrook Search Consultants when I was a freelance qualitative consultant considering going back to work. And he and I would just chat regularly about the job market and what was in it for me if I left my freelance business and went full time and what opportunities there were. And it has always been a pleasure to talk to him. Matt, welcome to the Greenbook Podcast.
Thank you, Karen. It's great to be here. I'm so excited to be here. A little bit up front, I'm a huge podcast fan. It's first time on a podcast, so this is a great experience for me. But if I slip into emulating any of my favorite podcasters like Kai Risdall, Scott Galloway, or Stephen Dubner, you'll have to forgive me in advance if I adopt their style, if you will.
That's great. That's great. No, and really no need to apologize. Be yourself. Bring it. I don't know any of those podcasters. So
they're wonderful. They're yeah.
So now we'll have to add those links at the end of the episode, like ends, since he mentioned them. So we'll check.
Marketplace. Scott Galloway probably has 3 different podcasts, and Stephen Dubner does Freakonomics.
Oh, yes. That I have listened to, actually. So anyway, well, we will make this one our own, but it's so good to have you here. And for everyone listening, if you don't know Matt, you're about to get to know him, but he's got, 30 years plus experience in this industry from the client side, supplier side, as a recruiter. He leads Cranbrook Search Consultants and kind of like one of the go-tos in this industry, if not the go-to when you first start off on a job hunt or whether you're looking for someone. So Matt, I'm going to stop there and let you do more of an introduction, expand upon it, and then we'll continue rolling the conversation along.
Well, first of all, I wanted to just mention the fact that Karen and I work together on the Insights Career Network, and I have found that to be extremely fulfilling. And I take my hat off to all those wonderful people that volunteer on that program. It's just done some really wonderful things for our industry, and it's just a great example of the industry kind of coming together and working together to a common good, even though it's everybody like ourselves included are doing it voluntarily. So it's really a wonderful program, and I'm thrilled to be part of that. But my core business, right? I mean, I've got a core business that I do have to attend to is Cranbrook Search Consultants, and we're an executive search firm that specializes in the insights industry. I started the company after, as you mentioned, 10 years on the client side and roughly 10 years on the supplier side, essentially because this is something I've always wanted to do, felt like this is something that really I enjoy doing. And I'll get into a couple of reasons why later on, based on some of the questions that we talked about. But we work with market research companies primarily, also client-side firms, but essentially we're looking for insights talent or within reasonable concentric circles around that core of insights and marketing. That's basically what we do. If I had to break it down to a granular level, our typical or our target client is a supplier side company, an insights company, roughly 40 to 120 million in revenue. We certainly work with companies much smaller than that, much larger than that, all the way up to Nielsen and the likes. But that's sort of our core. Our typical market research search is a vice president of business development or a vice president of operations. An important strategic role for a company to fill, and they're looking for some assistance to make sure that they get that right.
And, thank you for sharing that. I think it's important to our listeners to, understand the context for the show. We're going to be digging into the current job market and hiring trends, and you are uniquely qualified to talk about that because it's the nature of your business. But I loved the context of who actually works with you, because these are strategic roles. So you have a different lens, right? That comes from your vast experience. So let's just talk a little bit about what you think kind of the advantages for somebody just in working with a search firm versus just going on a job hunt. I think that we know that there are lots of people out there through our work at Insights Career Network and the incredible number of followers they have, lots of people who are looking for something. And I think sometimes people wonder, should I do that? Should I work with a firm on both sides of it, right? Should I use a firm because I have a hiring need, or should I reach out to a firm because I have a job need? Like, how do people discern whether it's the right approach for them?
That's a good question, and it really depends. Obviously, it's a different criteria for client side. The companies that hire us versus candidates, right? Those are very different situations. But in the terms of the clients, it's been my experience that companies and executive search firms that really partner with one another and really get to, especially on the part of the executive search firm, where they take the time and learn about the company, learn about their strengths and weaknesses, and really understand the company itself. That then they can add value to that process. Otherwise, you kind of fall into this trap where you're just sending resumes because you're not certain what it is that they're looking for. I've been very fortunate in that I've been able to partner with a lot of amazing companies, and you get to know their leadership, you get to know their teams, and you're much more effective that way when you're truly partnered with the firm. And I think one of the benefits, one of the other benefits that an executive search firm can bring is we spend a lot of our time looking at passive candidates, right? I mean, of course, we're talking to active candidates, people that are in the search mode right now and looking to find a job. But we also spend a lot of time just talking to people who may or may not be interested in an opportunity. And we found that helps us to really make a match, right? So we've, in our back pocket, I've got a handful of candidates who I think would be great at a marketing research firm in let's say, a marketing sciences role. And when one of those comes up, I immediately can go to that group and say, hey, here's an opportunity. Let's talk about it. And that's kind of where the magic happens. From the candidate perspective, I think talking with and engaging with a search firm can be beneficial just simply because it's our job to talk to companies and talk about jobs, right? We tend to be more cognizant and more aware of the roles that are out there. So networking with myself and my colleagues in this space, and there are some amazing companies and people in this space. I wrote down, and I'll get to that in a second, but there are some amazing companies that are out there that we kind of break the mold of the stereotypes that you hear of insight or of search firms. And that's a real benefit for the candidate, right? How can you expand your networking and give yourself a better chance to find an opportunity?
And I can attest to that. As I mentioned earlier, you and I had many conversations, 10 years ago, when I wasn't really looking for work, and ultimately got a job that a different search consultant reached out to me directly for, and that's how it all happened. But I had those conversations with you, and then I, saw you at events, and you were always just walking around, just talking to people, just getting to know people with no agenda whatsoever. I remembered, again, I was working with Insights Now, who, shout out to Greg Stuckey, and we were at a booth when you came up to us, and he was like, like, the thing about Matt is he's not poaching you. Like, he just wants to have conversations. Like, there's trust for you within the industry, and I think that's probably a challenging thing to build, but you've done it very well.
Thank you. There's always that ulterior motive. I mean, I'd be lying to say I'm not trying to find clients or candidates when I'm walking the halls of an event. But if you make that your priority, it's going to get in the way of meaningful dialogue. So thank you.
Yeah. No, my pleasure. And I mean it. So there's perks for all working with a search firm, but there's also some challenges, or even maybe some misconceptions about that kind of a partnership versus an independent job seeker or somebody who's just putting job postings out there on LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. Are there any that you can clarify for us right now? Some of those misconceptions.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge is there is it's sort of stereotypical that search firms are just jamming candidates, and they're ruthless and unscrupulous in their techniques and their methods, right? And so this could be an entire podcast of what makes bad recruiter stories. And the truth of the matter is, I actually started my company first of all because I this goes way, way back in my professional career. I really enjoy this process of getting people promoted and finding people jobs. Um, to the point where I was actually doing that. I was sending candidates to recruiters that I knew, but I was recruited a couple of different times by these archetypical recruiters who, we were trying to break the mold on. One guy in particular, I was working at General Motors at the time, and he was, this old time New York. No offense to my good friends in New York City, but this old time New York. He calls me. He's like, Matt, you gotta resign from GM today. You got an offer. You gotta resign. Tell me you're gonna resign. And I felt like I was talking with the mafia, and he was going to come and do a hit on me if I didn't resign. The next guy, this is the one that really prompted me to start the company, is you get to know your recruiter through the process, right? And I was being recruited for a market research company, and his arrogance was palatable. I mean, you could just feel it every time you talked with this guy. And he told me exactly how much money he made, which was an obscene amount of money, which I'm not anywhere close to that. I'll be honest. But number two, and he lived in a high rise apartment in South Florida, and yada yada yada. And yet, in my humble opinion, he had very little knowledge of market research. Like, he was functioning in this space and doing very well with almost no knowledge. And that was for me the trigger. I'm like, well, gosh, if a guy like that could do it, why couldn't I try this? And long story short, a dear friend of mine, John Gongas, I went to his office. I said, John, I got this idea. What do you think? And he's like, if you do it, Matt, I'll hire you. And that's all I needed. So God bless John Gongas for many, many reasons, but one of which is he was really instrumental in getting me started and starting the company.
I think that there is something to be said for that one person, right?
Mm-hmm.
That one person who can really kind of make or break a career.
Yep.
So, and in this case, make a career.
Yeah.
We all just need that one advocate, right?
Yeah, exactly. And in that case, I think I knew I just needed to hear that approval, and especially from someone like John, who I love and adore. So, and real quickly though, I do want to mention the colleagues that I had talked about before. So, there's folks like Karen Morgan, Lindsay Bartlett, Amy Comley, and Laura Jusfreund, all amazing recruiters, all highly ethical, doing it the right way. So all those stereotypes that you're afraid of, forget about it. When you're talking with these folks, they're amazing at what they do. And
Yeah.
I'm, it's just an honor to work with people like that.
And yes, follow all of them on LinkedIn. Like, I think it's great. They're often sharing positions. And what I think is something that you said earlier is, yes, there's the audience right now that needs a job. There's plenty of those people. But if you are ambitious in your career, have conversations with these folks well in advance of, what you might want. You might be thinking, I'm good right now, but I don't know where I'll be in 5 years, or I might want to make a change in 5 years. It's not too early to start to think through your future career today.
Absolutely.
My advice, my layman's advice, as someone who has also been around for 30 some odd years.
I tell this to our students. I'll talk a little bit about this later, but I tell this to our students all the time, and I give them that list, right? I put that up every presentation I do to the MSMR students at Michigan State, and I say, guys, first of all, just start networking, but these are the folks you want to start with, and then I throw out a bunch of other folks that I want them to connect with, and it's like, yeah, it's never too early, right? Start doing this early so that you build and you build the support network, if you will.
Yeah, and I think, again, I'll stay with this concept for a minute of what people should do if they're just, in that earlier phase. I remember when we talked, looking at job descriptions and thinking, what does a kind of a VP of qualitative do, for example? Like, what does that job entail? What is that description, and do I aspire to that?
Mm-hmm.
Things like that, in being very specific. And when I see somebody sharing a position on LinkedIn, I'll check it out and I'll be like, what are the job responsibilities associated with that role? Not for myself as somebody looking, but as somebody who's thinking about event programming right now. I kind of want to know, what are the positions that would be interesting to get on stage. So there might be a subtle reason for looking at those job descriptions that isn't to fill an immediate need. So don't dismiss something because you're not interested in the now. Think about what it could mean just to have that knowledge. Grow your knowledge of positions in the industry and be really mindful about how you use them in the future.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about the current market, right? So I'm sure again we have a lot of listeners that are probably seeking work right now, or open to work, or looking for their next position. And I know that there's a lot of tension always around that. So let's just get to that. How would you describe the current state of the market?
Um, Everything's fine. There's no problems whatsoever. It's a perfect world.
Yay! And with that, we'll wrap. No.
That is so untrue. Wow. There's so much going on right now. Again, this is not just a podcast. This is a TED talk that any one of us could do. There's been seismic shifts going on in hiring, and some of those changes are happening really rapidly. Others have been kind of slowly building, but this year, especially 2025, the best, a good part of 2024 also, we're seeing some of these changes. It's, I kind of feel like, geez, wow, I wish I'd have thought about that when I heard about the Bureau of Labor and Statistics altering the job reports from basically half of 2024 and the first part of this year, right? Reducing 1 million jobs, like taking 1 million jobs off the reports. All of us that are in this business are saying, no kidding. Wow. You mean to tell me that the job market has been slow a lot longer than you think? It has been incredibly slow. There's a lot of material out there. In fact, Lindsay Bartlett put together a great assessment on sort of the hiring freeze, and I would recommend people to go and look at that. I believe it's on their website. But there's just, seismic changes that are happening. Hiring hasn't stopped completely, but hiring has changed pretty dramatically, and there's been a real slowdown. And there's also a fair amount of seasonality when it comes to hiring and insights. You're probably well aware of this. Everyone that's been in this business kind of understands it. In Q4, there's this ramp up of activity, a lot of hiring in Q1 and Q2, and then in Q3, things sort of slow down a little bit. There's also a fair amount of cyclical things that go on, right? There's acquisitions and expansions, and companies that are being acquired stop hiring. Once they're through the acquisition, there's more hiring. So when you see a lot of those sorts of activities, it does affect the hiring market. But just based on what we've been seeing and the slowdown in client investment in research has affected the industry pretty dramatically. And this is, and Lindsay makes this point in her documents. When clients cut back on spending, their market research is one of those things that's easy to pull back because it doesn't hurt you right away. It's sort of a delay. It will hurt you, but you don't feel the pain straight away. And so we have absolutely seen that. But yeah, there's an absolute pullback and a change in the demand for talent right now. And that changes everything about this process, right? When in 2021 and 2022, when there was more jobs than candidates, hiring firms really had to be reactive. They had to grab candidates that were available, right? As soon as they made themselves available, they had to compete for candidates. They had to make really compelling offers. They had to, finesse their hiring process, not to drag it out because they were losing candidates. And now we kind of have the flip, right? So the tables have turned, so to speak. And so now you have more candidates and you have jobs. And when that happens, it's natural for clients, for hiring managers to slow the process down, to want to see, I hear this often. Hey, Matt, Bob was a great candidate. We love Bob. It's sensational. Now go find us 3 other people. We want to interview them too. And I sit there and I go, you just told me you love Bob. Why do you want to start dating somebody else? Just make a commitment and let's go. But they can't because they know they've got the possibility that there could be 4 other candidates out there that could be as good or better.
Better than Bob? That's hard to
Better
believe.
than Bob. Yeah.
It's hard to believe.
But again, and I don't blame the clients. It's just a normal reaction to the environment. And that is they have the leverage. And so they're going to be more, the process is going to take a bit longer. They're going to be more deliberate. And there's also going to be some situations where they will string along people in the thoughts that, yeah, we're going to be able to make an offer, but it doesn't pan out, and then it all stops.
What's the sidebar? This wasn't on our brief, so I'm stepping out for a second, but I'm thinking about somebody in particular who actually I think has been caught up in that.
Mm-hmm.
The somebody like Bob, it's a great candidate. We'd love to hire you, but we do feel this need to talk to a few other people, slowing the whole process down. What's the advice for a candidate who might be in that ambiguity of, like, I think I did great, but they're not making a decision yet because they don't have to? Advice for that candidate?
Yeah, if the person's in the middle of a disruption, right? They've got laid off, or there was a disruption at their previous employer, and they're limited in what they can and can't do. If the person is passive, I strongly advise people to say, look, if you're getting strung along, just tell them, look, if you're not interested in making me a bona fide offer, this has been wonderful and it's great, but let's just go our separate ways. I am not an authority. I have no authority whatsoever when it comes to dating. My wife will attest to you that I'm absolutely. I mean, I fell into the relationship with my wife. I'm not kidding you. I was actually trying to set her up with my younger brother, and she had to tell me, no, I don't want to see him. I want to see you. So keeping that in mind, the recruiting process is not that different from dating. And if one person is too eager or not eager enough, it will be a turnoff to the other person. So my advice is always play it cool. Try to play it as cool as possible. Stay interested, stay active, but don't be afraid to push back. If you feel like you're not being respected, or if you feel like this process isn't going anywhere, say so. Just say, you know what, this has been great. I've had some great conversations. I love what you guys are all about. But if this is going nowhere, then let me know. And then we'll just, we'll part and we've had a great time. But if it's serious, then let's talk about it. And you'd be surprised at the reaction. A lot of times companies will go, whoa, we don't run, don't go. We're serious. Yeah. But that's a hard conversation to do, especially if you've had a disruption and you need a job. But when you say, I need a job, if you have, again, I'm going to, no authority on this whatsoever, but if you act desperate in any way, shape, or form, it turns off the other person.
Yeah. No, I do. I think that's great advice. And I think, I think that it is, I just want to point out kind of awareness for the audience. We recognize that if you are in a need state, how uncomfortable that is.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things my husband and I always said to our kids is, always be looking when you're younger, because the best time to find your next job is when you are currently gainfully employed. Okay. So like when you're in that career growth stage. Mm-hmm. And we understand that looking for a job when you have a job is one mindset. Looking for it when you really are in need is another. So kind of acknowledging that for folks. Curious, Matt, if there's a type of role where you're seeing stronger demand at the moment, which can also segue into type of skills. Like, where is there demand, if at all, or is it really just kind of universally tough right now?
It is universally tough right now. But there's silver linings. There's some good stuff that's happening right now. And first and foremost, it's kind of like segmenting the market, right? So the Insights Association has done a great job of analyzing the market and where's the growth happening and maybe where it's not happening. And, spoiler alert, Captain Obvious is going to tell you that the growth is happening with the data, the digital data analytics segment, as they call it, that group of companies. And it's, 15% of the industry's is growing very rapidly, 12 to 15% a year. Those companies are going to continue to hire. They're doing very, very well. The traditional market research companies are not. They're not growing. They're a big part of the industry, probably $35 to $40 billion in revenue collectively, if you will. But they're growing at a glacier pace, if at all, right? In some segments within that segment, some aspects of that segment are probably shrinking. So There are opportunities out there, but they tend to be more data analytic oriented. Traditional market research skills are still valuable, but those companies are not hiring to the same extent. The one thing that we have absolutely seen is where companies want to bolster their sales, so they want to hire salespeople, but they're in a bit of a quandary, right? So we want to bring on new people so we can add sales, but we really don't want to add the cost. And so they're kind of trying to shift maybe some of that balance of base salary to commissions more heavily towards commissions. And so they're going to struggle to find the right talent
Yeah.
when you put the onus on the new employee.
Yeah.
But again, it's not as if hiring is completely frozen like it did, let's say, in 2009, but it is definitely slower right now. The real growth again is with data analytics and
Yeah.
highly specialized groups like that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that actually tracks with some other data points in my head. So I'm glad you've mentioned that. Sidebar to those listening, what are the things it's tracking with? We do we track things editorially, and our editorial content around data is like, popping right now. People
Mhm.
are reading up on data and analytics, in particular in our ecosystem, as opposed to just kind of the softer consumer insights side of the business, right? So anyway, so it's good validation that if you are a multifaceted researcher, um, maybe you want to kind of shore up your data analysis skills or your use of data analysis tools, which, spoiler alert, we will be talking about AI soon. But are there other kind of skills that you think that could be really critical right now for people to kind of shore up a little bit to face kind of the market the way it is now and then down the road?
Yeah, the growth within the traditional market research is in strategic partnerships, right? So companies that can really add strategic insight for their clients. I'm old enough to, and I started with a company that was very traditional. The market research that we did, we viewed ourselves as data providers, right? I was told, not kidding, I was told by my boss when I was a young researcher at General Motors, Matt, just read the charts. Don't offer your opinions. And this was hard for me because in my previous job, my commanding officer would say, Matt, is the plane ready to fly? And I would have to
Right.
give him a reasonable, opinion
Let's just
of whether or not the plane could fly.
So hold on a minute, because if you don't know, like, he's being literal.
Yeah.
Matt is a former captain in the U.S. Marine Corps. I was going to mention that in your introduction. So anyway, so as you're speaking,
Yeah.
he's being literal.
Yeah.
This is a part of his background. So keep going, but I wanted to share that
But
with everybody.
that is so foreign to what the skills are needed now as researchers and insights professionals. We need to be able to provide, the royal we, need to be able to provide a point of view, need to be strategically conversant, right? We got to be able to provide a point of view and strategy input, because otherwise you're just a data provider and you're going to be replaced really rapidly.
And I've had that conversation with people where you suddenly feel you've arrived when you can look at the data and actually have a point of view about it. That's a big kind of rite of passage within the industry for younger researchers who are like, I've seen the data, I've seen the research, I've read the findings. I think it means this. When you have enough of a kind of self-proficiency to be able to say, wait, I actually can glean something from this and offer an insight or offer a recommendation. That's a big deal. So it's
Exactly.
interesting to think about that being squashed in you. I can't fathom that. That's actually
It
important.
was difficult, and no disrespect, that was just the culture at the time at that
Yeah.
company. It's changed dramatically, but yeah, just being strategic partners, but also like you were pointing out, so understanding the quantitative data, but also the qualitative, and also what's happening what other resources you have, secondary data, or just what's happening in the macro and microeconomics of your industry or category. It's the researcher. The effective researchers now are the folks who are aware of all those things and are not just looking at the survey results, right? Because the
No.
survey results, let's be honest, sometimes people don't tell the complete truth in a survey. And you sometimes have to extrapolate from what they're saying to what's really happening in the marketplace, right?
Yeah.
The old adage is, if you ask people what kind of television program they would like to see, they would tell you, high-minded British documentaries and dramas, right? Nobody ever tells you they want to see, Jerry Springer or some
Yeah. Yeah.
version of that. But
Yeah.
you have to understand what's happening in the marketplace, and take that take take all aspects and an all encompassing point of view. So again, if it's a skill, I think it's just being multifaceted in your insights and not just focusing on one element.
Yeah, I know. I appreciate that kind of having a macro view of the world, and also the being able to connect the dots. Correct me if I'm wrong, but from
Mhm.
the different data points, right? Whether qualitative, quantitative, um, online. I remember when you have age on your side. I remember when online reviews were first a thing before people started mining them so deeply that one of the clients that I worked with was like, let's also start mining some of these reviews. Like, yeah, let's do that. And we started to do some review mining to fold into our more holistic reporting back to the C-suite there. And that's just an example. Use more tools perhaps to be able to be a kind of a holistic researcher, not just one area of expertise. Probably important, even if you're trying to focus on data and analytics right now, to have that macro view. I'm glad you shared that.
Absolutely.
Is there anything on the flip side that you think is kind of being deprioritized in the hiring process or the recruitment process?
Yeah, I wouldn't say deprioritize. I would say that some of the skills that we were all taught and that are still being taught, statistics, uh, uh, method differences in methodology and questionnaire design and those sorts of things. Those are all table stakes now, right?
Yeah.
And you have to have those skills. So it's a bit more challenging right now if you're entering into this space or you're evolving in your career. It's a bit more challenging to stay current because you do have to continue to up your game and add skills and layer on those skills because the things that differentiated you as a great researcher because you were great at stats are kind of those are the table stakes right now.
Yeah.
So going back to my early days at General Motors, Debbie Pruitt, who ended up having a great career at GFK, literally sat across the hall from me, and I would walk over to her office because she was this stats whiz with every single fundamental question of stats that I could that I had, right, because I was really deficient in that. And it's funny, she actually put together a little tutorial that we did through several lunch and learns that she called Stats for Brats, where she brought all of us MBAs up to speed on stats. But and she was able to automate all these great things, whereas in the days when that stuff wasn't available. But now those things are pretty much table stakes.
Mm.
You have to know your stuff. You've got to have those, the social science skills in order to operate, but they're not really differentiators anymore. One of the things I do want to refer back to our earlier conversation about the skills is Tim Hoskins wrote a great book called, I think it's Insights on the Brink.
Mm.
In that book, there's a section that he talks about the skills that he thinks we need to recruit for and to change our minds in terms of insights. And it's stuff that is just it sounds completely reasonable, but it's really radical for researchers. Like we need to recruit people and to tell people they need to be more persuasive. They have to have, as we were talking about before, a point of view, because a lot of times your clients don't want to hear the bad news, and sometimes you're going to have to schmooze them a little bit and
Yeah.
get them over maybe some of their internal objections. And that's not easy to do if you're just reading, the report and saying the blue bar is bigger than the red bar.
Yeah.
So, having those human skills where you're able to, be persuasive, be a bit of a salesperson too. There's nothing wrong with doing that because
Yeah.
sometimes there's organizational resistance to what's happening. And
Yeah.
if you're lacking in those skills, nothing is worse than spending all this time and money to collect information and to gather information only to see it, just left on the floor and not,
Yeah.
incorporated into actual action.
Yeah, yeah. I love that. We talk so much about storytelling in this industry, finding the story, telling the story. but we don't necessarily talk about the communication of the
Mhm.
story and, the approach to be persuasive. So I'm glad you called that out because all of it matters. The how you communicate the findings, how you communicate the story you're telling.
Right,
It's like a whole
and
different nuance.
full credit to Tim. I would strongly advise people to get his book.
Yeah,
I'm really lucky. Tim's going to come and speak at this Partner Insight Summit next week in East Lansing, and
cool.
I'm just thrilled to get him in front of all of our students. So I want to point to that and say, guys, he's
Yeah,
talking to you. This is
yeah,
exactly the sort of things that you guys need to be able to do.
yeah, yeah. So cool, so cool. So so I really do need to talk about AI, right? And
Wait, what's that?
I here we've been talking for more than half an hour already, and we haven't gone there yet. So I give us credit,
Mhm.
but uh, AI and hiring. To what extent is it changing things? Has it changed things? In both, the we'll start with the hiring process because I think that might be most of interest to people, to potential candidates who are listening, like,
Right.
and then we could talk about whether they should be using it. But first, let's talk about how it's shaping things on the, on the hiring side.
Well, first of all, yeah, AI. I've never heard of this. What is this again? You'll have to tell me what it is. No, it is absolutely changing everything. I mean, there have been automated versions of, keyword searches in everybody's applicant tracking system. If I opened up my ATS over my right shoulder, I could show you how just doing basic things with, a database full of resumes, I can come up with 20 or 30 resumes that most meet the criteria I'm looking for. And recruiters have been doing that for years, right? Those are table stakes again. And every hiring company has that same capability, right? So all of those things are kind of what we've been doing, but the tools that are now coming online with AI capabilities are taking that to, to extremes now, right? And I think I think it's all for the better. Ultimately, we're going to get better and more efficient searches. I think it's going to give candidates the opportunity to be more visible and have greater. And I'll get to exactly why. But focusing on the client side, I think they're going to be able to find, first of all, communicate their roles better just by having better job descriptions and better, even one step further back, just a better understanding of their talent needs, right? There's some great tools for just kind of assessing, well, do we really need the team set up the way that we have it, or can we alter that? And then defining your jobs and your roles better, understanding your marketplace better, which includes salary and benefits and everything else, right? Because what it takes to attract somebody in New York City is very different than what it takes to attract somebody in Omaha, Nebraska. And so those tools are going to allow hiring managers to be more sophisticated in their hiring. So there's a lot of really good benefits. I know there's a fear that folks are going to be filtered out of the process, right? Like, oh, AI is going to filter me out because I don't have the right, resume or whatever. I think that's possible, but that happens now, right? That happens with any applicant tracking system. It's probably more likely that the sophisticated AI tools are actually going to give the hiring manager some of those diamond in the roughs or non-traditional candidates who might really excel. All of us as recruiters can tell stories about, hey, I talked to this candidate, it didn't appear to look like a great fit, but then it turns out I had one client who I had that situation with, right? I introduced him to the client. Afterwards, the president of the company called me and said, Matt, I wasn't sure I should have had that conversation. I didn't see the real connection until I had the conversation. And he said, now I think that she's probably going to run our company at some point. And he was
Interesting.
right. And
Yeah.
she ended up being the president of the company. But that happens every once in a while. I think it's going to happen more often with
Mm,
some of the AI capabilities that are out there.
yeah, yeah. On the flip side, thinking about the candidate now. So, sidebar story, I talked to somebody who is like toying with, um, is AI updating a resume the right decision, right? Should I trust AI to update my resume because it's so easy to do that? Or should AI, draft my cover letter? Should AI find me the position? Should an AI agent apply to those positions for me? Like all of the tools that are available to a candidate, um, what do you see kind of happening in that space? And are there either words of advice or cautionary tales or anything that you would share? Should they lean in and say, use the tools,
Yeah,
or should they be cautious? What's your thought?
absolutely use the tools, but with caution, right? Don't completely turn everything over to it, but
Yeah.
absolutely leverage what's out there. I had a great conversation with somebody just the other day who said, and this was amazing what this candidate did on her own. She's like, well, man, I put in the job description and I told AI that I wanted to build an interview and have, the AI tool interview me and then grade my performance. And she did this all on her own. And I was like, well, first of all, that's brilliant. Second of
Yeah.
all, it's the old adage, to get good at something, you got to practice it. Right. And this,
Yeah.
this person had not done a lot of interviewing because she had been recruited from, her boss at a former company brought her to her new company, that sort
Yeah.
of thing. Never had to go through the interview process. And she's like, I was rusty at it. I didn't know what to do. And after doing a
Awesome.
couple series of those, she was ready for, she was ready for prime time. And
Yeah.
she said, yeah, I would have stumbled in the first couple of interviews because I hadn't done it in 12 years. And
Yeah.
yeah, so those things are really hard to replace, and
Yeah.
those sorts of capabilities. But also going back to just helping to create marketing materials. Like I am a huge believer in that we're all marketing at all the time, right? And in our LinkedIn profiles and even our postings on social media should have a thought towards, okay, what are we trying to say here? What kind of image are we trying to build? What are we trying to communicate to our colleagues, our industry? And
Yeah.
the AI tools are great at doing that, right?
Yeah.
So engage those and try to build your brand. There's a woman named JT O'Donnell who I absolutely like, in terms of her ability to create really great candidate coaching, if you will.
Mhm.
And one of the things she mentions is a unique selling proposition, right? So AI tools can help you boil down to what is your unique selling proposition and how can you differentiate yourself and what can you say in a meaningful and specific way to get the attention of a hiring manager. So
Sure.
yeah, all of those things are
Yeah.
absolutely wonderful. I think it's going to be better for recruiting and better for candidates, especially for candidates. Uh,
Yeah. I know somebody else who recorded, kind of, using a transcription tool, recorded the interview, fed it into AI and asked, kind of, how do you think I did?
yep.
And, it gave that, like, hey, here's what you did well. Here's what you could improve the next time. Like it gave kind of feedback. Now, whether it was the right feedback, who knows? But it was feedback,
Uh-huh.
somebody who could listen in on your interview and then let you know how they thought you did afterwards. I'm like, AI is pretty cool.
Yeah, and it's it's hard to get upset or mad at a computer program, right? It's
Yeah.
if I gave that advice to somebody that might be offensive, but if
Yeah.
they hear it from literally a neutral party, it could be a little bit
Yeah.
easier to
Yeah.
digest, right?
Yeah. I do want to ask. I'm looking at the clock and I'm thinking, oh man, we've got like 5 minutes left max here. So already I'm at 45 minutes, and I always try to. I always do this, but I do have another question. Um, you know, and this kind of has to do with the idea of back to the office or remote working. I am lucky. I have worked in my home, actually in this home since, 2000, since 1999. I have not gone to an office. And so I was already well established during COVID when a lot of people were brought home. Now people are being brought back to an office. What is the latest on kind of work from home, remote working, hybrid working? Um, what's the latest on that?
There's definitely a shift in at least hybrid and in some cases complete return to office.
Mhm.
We have seen that with client side companies going back a couple of years, right? So client-side companies invested a lot of money in real estate. So they've got offices all over the country and they want to put people into their offices. They're tired of paying for rent or having a building that's sitting empty when, they could have bodies in there, which is the purpose of it. Not all companies, that's not, doesn't describe everybody, but that is one of the motivations. See, and there's some really good reasons for that, right? Um, if you've got everybody in one place, there all of those informal interactions that happen in the office are occurring, right? So somebody's walking down to go to the lunchroom or whatever, they bump into a colleague, and there's that natural spark that happens. Or if you
Yeah.
just simply have a question that you wouldn't probably Zoom call somebody or call them up,
Right.
you can ask a quick question. And especially for younger associates, right? Working in an office with other professionals, especially folks you can learn from, is invaluable. I tell that to our students. I've told it to my own children. Going into a place where you're going to be rubbing elbows with your peers, especially senior people, gives you an opportunity to learn from them that you wouldn't get if you were working remotely. And then
Yeah.
they go, my kids are like, well, Dad, you work from home. How do you, I'm like, yeah, well, I don't do as I do, do as I say.
Well, or certainly, Greenbook is a virtual company, and I will say we use our Slack, man. We use our Slack as if we are walking down a hallway. We are like, got a second?
Yep.
Hey,
Yep.
quick question. Like we use our Slack like nobody's business here,
Right.
and I think that if
And you
you are
have to do that.
yeah,
Absolutely. You've
yeah,
got to, the corporate culture, the companies that do it well, remote, that is absolutely ingrained in their culture.
yeah,
But I do think that there is that shift. So we're going to be seeing more of that. What it's going to mean to
interesting.
candidates is that those remote opportunities are going to be fewer and further between, and more difficult to get. Now, I totally get it, right? Like for me, this has been a great lifestyle change. I suspect it has been for you to work remotely. And I know there are a lot of folks who there are very unique situations that working remotely is really only the viable option. Otherwise, they're out of the workforce, and
Yeah,
we
yeah,
don't want that either, right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
I know that it's not going to be without a fair amount of discomfort and pain,
yeah,
right? That there's going to be some problems
yeah,
associated with that, but at the same time, I totally understand from the client's perspective why
yeah.
they want to have people back in the office.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you for that. I know that that would have been a burning question that I had, as I've talked to, again, some people that are looking, and that is a deal breaker, and they're like, "God, I just," it's hard to let go of, right? But that, might also be aging some people, right? There there may be new people who are like, "Cool, bring it on." New people to the industry who are haven't known it the other way,
Right.
and now they're looking for that social interaction as well, which I think happens in their 20s in particular. Anyway, for the sake of time, I already have to jump ahead to like, gosh, what's a question that you really wanted to talk about that I didn't get to because we could talk for 2 hours?
Well, there. So this is sort of I'm a send up to Greenbook too, right? This is way too early to tell. This is my bold prediction, if you will. I do think that with all the radical changes that are going on technologically, and just in the industry in general, but hiring in specific, that I do think that finally companies are going to be more open to hiring gig workers, if you will.
Hmm.
I know Lenny's been talking about this for 15 or 20 years, right? And I really get the feeling that more and more there's going to be opportunities to do that. So there's going to be some real benefits to that, obviously, to the employees, because they'll be able to pick and choose what projects they want to work on. Uh, they'll likely be able to work from home in some of those situations, but also for the employers, right? You won't have the burden of taking on full-time employees when you just have to ramp up for this project, and then maybe that'll be for 6 months or a year, and that after that you're not certain. So there's some give and take with that, right? So you're going to have to pay folks a little bit more in terms of an hourly wage, but you don't have these longevity costs. I do think that some of the things that are happening with technology are going to enable that. And so what used to be very nascent in terms of, the number of contractors slash gig workers is going to grow. I,
Yeah.
I could be completely wrong, but I have this feeling that you're going to start seeing that us moving in.
Yeah, well, Yeah, what I keep thinking is there's going to be a lot of people who are self-employed in our industry who are like, "All right, I'm ready."
Mhm.
So, that's those are some people that have been doing different types of gigs, even if they're research projects, ad hoc research projects.
Right.
But from what I'm understanding, a gig worker might be beyond just a research project, but maybe it's different aspects of
Mhm.
maybe your particular gig. Sort of like when I was a qualitative researcher and then I was hiring a report writer. It's like, maybe I'm just hiring a report writer for just this one project, like
Mhm.
different facets of the job could be brought in by somebody else. Um, Anyway,
Yeah,
so
it's
very,
worked it's worked extremely well in the qualitative space.
it
I
has,
know a
it
lot of
has.
amazing qualitative worker
Yeah.
researchers who have never been part of a full-time employment situation at a GFK or whatever. They've worked,
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
gig workers or contracts for their
Yeah.
entire careers.
It's very interesting, very interesting. Anyway, well, look, that really has to be our time, but thank you so much, Matt. What a pleasure talking to you. I could go on for hours, and I am sure our audience is, going to be, thrilled with this episode, probably have a listen over and over again. Thank you so much.
It's been my pleasure, Karen. It's always great to talk with you, and I'm a huge fan of Greenbook. So yeah, I'm just honored to be here.
Well, thank you again. And I'm sure I will see you at an event soon enough. What a pleasure. Thank you to our entire team that puts these episodes out there. Thank you to our editor, Big Bad Audio. Appreciate what you do. And also to our listeners. Thank you for showing up week after week. We so appreciate you. Until next time, we'll see you again. Thanks for listening to the Greenbook Podcast. Bye-bye.